my dears, it's Menopause Taylor here, the gynecologist who is determined to teach you all the things you deserve to know about your health in general and your menopause in particular. So, on this YouTube channel, you get a real education. So I present everything in specifically ordered units, and everything you learn depends on already understanding what I've presented previously. So let me orient you to where we are. I have presented huge units on the three big diseases that are due to estrogen deficiency. They are heart attack, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's disease. And I've even presented multiple units on cancer, including cancer in general, endometrial uterine cancer, cervical cancer, breast cancer, and epithelial ovarian cancer. Well, today I'm going to present a unit on a disease that actually comprises facets of many of the diseases in these previous units. The specific disease I'll present may have a name that is somewhat familiar to you, but the actual education about it will definitely be completely new to you, and that's because it's highly unlikely that you've ever heard the whole story on it before. So stay tuned to this video tutorial for all of that. Now, you will not find this material in my book, either the first or the second edition, and that's because my book focuses specifically on menopause. And the disease we'll address today is one that affects women of all ages, but is most commonly associated with women at young ages. That's a big mistake, but that is and has always been the state of affairs. And in this video, I'll teach you why this is such a big oversight. Okay, so what's the disease of interest in this unit? Well, you probably know it by the name PCOS. PCOS. Now, PCOS, the P is for poly, the C is for cystic, the O is for ovary, and the S is for syndrome. But there's a real problem with that name for this disease. And that's what this first video in this unit is going to be all about. You see, the fact that the name itself specifies this as a disease of your ovaries is very misleading. While your ovaries manifest some of the effects of the disease, PCOS is not a disease of your ovaries specifically. Instead, it's a disease that is rooted much more generally. And it's related to many of the diseases we've already covered in previous units, including heart attack, diabetes, hypertension, Alzheimer's, and endometrial uterine cancer. So in this unit, I will elucidate all the different aspects of PCOS that make it critical for you to understand it fully. I really think PCOS deserves a name change. I don't think any of these are appropriate. I think PCOS should be an acronym for Permanent Cardiometabolic Ovary Syndrome. And later, I'll explain why. To put things into perspective, let me tell you how common PCOS is so that you can see why it's important to understand it. PCOS affects about 10% of all women, and yet its cause is unknown. Another reason it's so important for you to know about PCOS is that it can manifest in many different ways. Most women with PCOS exhibit some of the following characteristics. Hirsutism, which is hair on the face, chest, abdomen and arms, acne, male pattern hair loss, infrequent, unpredictable, irregular, or absent periods, infertility, multiple cysts on the ovaries, and obesity. But the big problem is that many women with PCOS have only a couple of these characteristics or hardly any of them. So diagnosis of PCOS can be very difficult, and failure to diagnose it early in life can result in big problems later on. Unfortunately, because polycystic ovary syndrome has the word ovary in its name, people assume two things that are completely incorrect. First, they assume that it is merely an abnormality limited to the ovaries. And second, they assume that it is only a gynecologic disease. These two mistaken assumptions result in a situation in which many women have PCOS but never get a formal diagnosis of it. So this means that while the reported prevalence is 10% of all women, the actual prevalence is much higher than that. Earlier, I mentioned that I think PCOS should be an acronym for Permanent Cardiometabolic Ovary Syndrome. And the reason I think that's a more apropos name is because the underlying abnormality in PCOS is a metabolic abnormality that affects multiple organ systems throughout your body and throughout your entire lifetime. There are really 3 overriding system abnormalities for PCOS. Dermatologic, which is skin, reproductive, and metabolic. So let me tell you how each of these system abnormalities presents itself with PCOS. I'll start with the most obvious one, which is dermatologic system abnormalities. 3 of the most common aspects of PCOS are skin and hair issues. These include hirsutism, acne, and male pattern hair loss. Hirsutism consists of excessive dark or coarse hair in a male-like pattern. Most commonly, this entails facial hair, chest hair, abdominal hair, and arm hair. Here are some photos of women with hirsutism due to PCOS. The second common dermatologic feature of PCOS is facial acne. And while the word cyst is in the name polycystic ovary syndrome and it refers to cysts on your ovaries, it just so happens that the acne on your face is cystic also. So it's not just an occasional zit here or there. It's usually deep, scarring, even painful acne. Here are some photos. And the third common dermatologic feature of PCOS is male pattern hair loss. Isn't it odd that PCOS puts too much hair on your face, chest, abdomen, and arms, but too little on your head? Sounds a lot like the hair pattern of men, doesn't it? If you're like most women with PCOS, you'll have thinning of the hair at your temples first. This is usually followed by thinning at the top of your head. Sometimes it's a matter of widening and thickening where you part your hair. Now, all of these are very obvious and very bothersome features, and if all women with PCOS exhibited them, it would be a simple diagnosis, but that is not the case. Women who have these dermatologic features of PCOS have them in widely varying degrees, and some women have none of them at all. They are usually lifelong problems for those unfortunate to have them. The second category of system abnormalities is reproductive system abnormalities. This category pertains to your periods, your fertility, your pregnancies, and your menopause. So right there, you see that it is not limited in time. Even though your reproductive life is limited in time, these reproductive features of PCOS are not. And the reproductive features of PCOS manifest differently over the course of your lifetime. The earliest manifestation is evident as soon as you go through puberty. You start having periods, but instead of having regular, predictable monthly periods, you have infrequent, unpredictable, irregular, quarterly, or absent periods. Next, you might decide to get pregnant. But with PCOS, it's common to discover that you have infertility. If you do happen to become pregnant, it is very common for women with PCOS to have complications of pregnancy. These include gestational diabetes and gestational high blood pressure, also called gestational hypertension. And eventually, when you become perimenopausal, PCOS causes your periods to become more regular, but also much heavier. The heavy bleeding is called abnormal uterine bleeding. So it amounts to trade-offs of one problem for another. Finally, you get to post-menopause. And then, even though you may have stopped having periods, PCOS puts you at increased risk for endometrial uterine cancer. So as you can see, PCOS affects every stage of your reproductive life in various different ways. And again, not all women with PCOS exhibit all of these characteristics. And those who do exhibit symptoms do so in varying degrees, making the diagnosis of PCOS very difficult in some cases. The final category of system abnormalities is the most important of all. But unfortunately, it's the one that gets the least attention. It's the one about which most women are completely unaware. These are the metabolic abnormalities. You may have heard of metabolic syndrome in conjunction with diabetes type 2. Metabolic syndrome is a cluster of metabolic risk factors for cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and diabetes type 2. It manifests as abnormal cardiac lipids. Cardiac lipids include total cholesterol, triglycerides, lousy LDL, and healthy HDL. I gave you an entire video tutorial on these back in the unit on heart attack. With metabolic syndrome, all of these cardiac lipids head in the wrong direction. Total cholesterol increases, triglycerides increase, lousy LDL increases, and healthy HDL decreases. 20% of women with PCOS have metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome increases your risk of cardiovascular disease and heart attack by 2 times. It increases your risk of high blood pressure by 3 times. And it increases your risk of diabetes type 2 by 5 to 10 times. I've already taught you that diabetes type 2 puts you at high risk of both heart attack and Alzheimer's. Some people even call Alzheimer's disease diabetes type 3. Maybe we should call PCOS diabetes type 4. Or maybe we should call it diabetes of your ovaries. But PCOS also causes obesity, and that adds a whole list of additional risk factors. Now, the reason I said that PCOS is a lifetime problem is because even after you get through perimenopause, these metabolic problems remain throughout post-menopause. Not only that, they all tend to worsen as you age. So as you get fatter on the outside of your body. You also get fatter on the inside of your body. You gain fat around your vital organs, most significantly your liver and your heart. There's actually something called fatty liver disease, and there are two types of fatty liver disease: alcoholic and non-alcoholic. PCOS puts you at risk for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD. Of course, if you're an alcoholic, you can get the other kind. Of all the possible manifestations of PCOS, the metabolic features are the most universal and the most serious. You can do all sorts of things to manage hirsutism, acne, and male pattern hair loss. And you can do all sorts of things to regulate your periods and get pregnant. But correcting the underlying metabolic abnormalities in PCOS is a much more difficult task. The key is to understand that PCOS is not just a disease of your ovaries. It is a disease of three separate organ systems: dermatologic, reproductive, and metabolic. Because it's not merely a disease of your ovaries, it does not belong only in the realm of gynecology. The problem is that with the name polycystic ovary disease, doctors who are not gynecologists rarely recognize it. And many gynecologists make the mistake of treating only the reproductive aspects of PCOS. And since many women with PCOS do not exhibit some of the more obvious non-gynecologic features, many go undiagnosed. So I really do think we should change the name to Permanent Cardiometabolic Ovary Syndrome. In summary, each of the three organ system abnormalities of PCOS may produce symptoms of the disease, but all are vastly variable from woman to woman. Dermatologic system abnormalities can manifest as hirsutism, acne, or male pattern hair loss. Reproductive system abnormalities can manifest as irregular, unpredictable, infrequent, or absent periods, infertility, pregnancy complications, abnormal uterine bleeding, and increased risk of endometrial uterine cancer. Metabolic system abnormalities can manifest as diabetes type 2, abnormal cardiac lipids, cardiovascular disease, increased risk of hypertension, increased risk of heart attack, obesity, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, also known as NAFLD. Here's a chart of these three system abnormalities and the symptoms associated with each. What you see here is a chart that has the timeline in the first column. I've divided it into time frames of puberty, reproductive, pregnancy, perimenopause, and postmenopause. The second column shows the dermatologic manifestations of PCOS. Notice that hirsutism and acne are common in puberty, but thereafter, hirsutism, acne, and male pattern hair loss become lifelong problems. The third column shows the reproductive manifestations for each stage of the timeline. Notice that they change for each phase of your reproductive life, progressing from the irregular, unpredictable, infrequent, or absent periods at puberty, to infertility when you desire pregnancy, to pregnancy complications during pregnancy, to abnormal uterine bleeding at perimenopause, to an increased risk of endometrial uterine cancer at postmenopause. And the fourth column shows the metabolic manifestations of PCOS. Most women are free of these during puberty, but after that, they are lifelong problems. You can find the chart by clicking on the link in the description box just below this screen, or you can go to menopausetailor.me where you can find all of my charts. And next week, I'll tell you what's at the root of these three organ systems that constitute the basis of PCOS. In the meantime, please, please, please schedule a consultation with me at menopausetailor.me if you have any possibility at all of having PCOS. And remember, the younger you are at the time of diagnosis, the better. So schedule consultations for the young women in your life who might have PCOS. In my consultations, I encounter women all the time who have had obvious PCOS their entire lives, and I'm the first doctor to inform them of that. That is just unacceptable. Regardless of your age, you need to know if you have it. Please subscribe here to my channel and to my newsletter, and be sure to follow me on social media for a lot of fun stuff. Bye, my dears.